So we are wrapping up the information on Section 6, the Northern Renaissance art, and we've already gone over some examples of the Flemish artists in the Northern Renaissance period. So finally, we're going to take a look at an example of a German artist, and that man is named Albrecht Dürer. So once again, I'm showing you where we are on the typed out line for you to make sure you're getting this information written down. Keep in mind when you're writing information down, you only need to write down what is in the red. This is just some extra information I included, but you do not need to write it down. That is the information that's in the black. So we know Dürer was a foremost Northern Renaissance artist who happened to be from one of the German states, and he was best known for painting numerous self-portraits, and I'll share with you in a moment at least one or two of those. Again, you don't have to write down the part about him being the master of the woodcut and being that first Northern artist to master some of the Italian Renaissance techniques. So just focus on him being a Northern Renaissance artist and him being known for painting numerous self-portraits. And here are two of those self-portraits. You can see one that he did in 1500. It is an oil on wood panel, and the other one was in 1498, so 2 years prior, another oil on wood panel. So two different self-portraits of Dürer. When it comes to the patrons in the German states, the one patron that you need to make sure you know about is the Fugger family, specifically the member known as Jacob Fugger. He was significant in patronizing the art of the Northern Renaissance. So we know that he tended to hire artists for his family. We know that the Fuggers are similar to the Medicis in Florence in that their fortune was the result of international banking. Just like we talked about, the Medicis received some of their fortune from banking in Florence. So there's a good little comparison between the Fugger family in the German states and the Medicis in Florence. You may wonder why I keep referring to German states as that instead of Germany, just like I did the Italian states for Italy. It's because at the time period we're studying, remember we said there's no official, Italy, well, there's no official Germany yet. The German states make up the Holy Roman Empire. So I just want to make that clear right now, because in future chapters, we're going to be going over the Holy Roman Empire and the German states that make up that large area. Eventually, when we get to the 1800s, like I told you, Italy will ultimately be united into one country. So will the German states. They will all unite to a Germany. So that's going to come much later in our class. So this brings an end to the information on Roman numeral 6, the Northern Renaissance art, and we are now going to move into our last section for the Renaissance chapter, which is Roman numeral 7, and that is going to focus on the women of the Renaissance era. So for that last section, this is the typed outline you should be using. As you can see, it doesn't take us very long to complete it, but you do need to make sure you have all of this important information for study purposes for the big test that's coming up very soon. When we study the wealthy women during the Renaissance era, there is this new debate that has emerged over the proper role of women in society. That is going to begin in the 14th century with Christine de Pizan, who we'll talk more about in a few minutes. But this debate that I'm talking about will continue for the next 600 years. Another way of saying this new debate, it's the woman question, or the French way of saying that, quelle de femme. So let me spell that for you. Queer So once again, Queerelles, then DES, and then femme is FEMMES. Quelle de femme, which basically means the woman question, okay? So we're looking at basically, what is the proper role of women in society? We know that women enjoyed an increased access to education during the Renaissance. However, they lost some status compared to women in the Middle Ages. For example, women functioned now, the Renaissance, as ornaments to their middle class or upper class husbands. What they mean by the term ornaments is they were basically there to look pretty, to make their husbands look better. So instead of running the households, while the husband is off fighting, which would have been, of course, for the Middle Ages, now in the Renaissance, they're viewed as these ornaments. Again, they're there to make the husband look a lot better. So with that in mind, we know that women were to make themselves pleasing to the man. Remember Castiglione? He wrote about this. And this concept of women making themselves more pleasing to the man applied only to the upper class women. Lower class women, on the other hand, had a completely different economic situation, and their status didn't change much compared to the Middle Ages. Whereas we see here, there's been change with the upper class women now that we have the Renaissance. That's why we're focusing on the upper class and not the lower class. There was also a sexual double standard during the Renaissance for women. And what they mean by that is women were to remain chaste until marriage, which means, again, completely faithful to one individual and not sleep around and have multiple partners. Men, on the other hand, were expected to be sexually active. They were basically permitted to go and sow their wild oats. So you can see the double standard that existed at this time. So on your number 6, there are 3 important Renaissance noblewomen that we need to talk about. The first one is probably the most important of the 3, Christine de Pizan. And she had 2 different publications that were known at this time period. The first one you can see here is titled The City of Ladies, published in 1405. This was specifically a chronicle of accomplishments of great women in history. So I would definitely make a note of that for the City of Ladies. You might want to make a note of that title. It should be in red, so that was my mistake. Another published writing from her was a year later, 1406. That one's not written on here, so you want to go ahead and jot it down. It's called 3 Virtues. And if you were to read that publication, it's basically considered a Renaissance woman's survival manual. Again, that title is 3 Virtues, and that was published in 1406. Remember, I'm not going to ask you the dates. They're just there for reference. You can also add to your outline information on her that she was perhaps Europe's first feminist. Now remember, a feminist could be male or female. These are people who are usually trying to support more rights for women. So she was well ahead of her time with her writings, of course, focusing on women. So definitely want to study her as a leading female author of the Renaissance. Our next example of Renaissance nobleman is Isabella d'Este. and she is considered the first lady of the Renaissance. We know that she set an example for women to break away from their traditional role as mere ornaments to their husbands. So this is basically directed to the women of the Renaissance. So she wants to send a message to the women that they don't have to be in that traditional role as just simply an ornament to their husband. She was a major patron of the arts, so we know she supported the local artists. She founded a school for young women, and she wrote over 2,000 letters that provided insight into politics and courtly life at that time. So here we have another great example of a Renaissance woman who was of wealth at the time. Moving on to our last example of a Renaissance woman, Artemisia Gentilci. Now she's different from the other two women that we just went over because she's not a writer. She's actually a well-known female painter. And actually she is known for her paintings during the post-Renaissance era. So the art movement that comes after the Renaissance is Baroque. So you'll want to make sure you label her as a Baroque painter. She is perhaps the first female artist to gain recognition in the post-Renaissance era. You have to remember that female artists at this time were largely consigned to portrait painting and imitative poses. She did something kind of outside of the box, not only as a painter, but as a female. She was the first woman to paint historical and religious scenes. Her best known example is her series of Judith slaying Holofernes paintings. As you can see here with this one, what she did was she took a biblical story and took it on as her own story to show her frustrations and things that went on in her past. Little background on her. When she was 14 years old, her father knew that she had this great artistic talent. So he hired her a tutor to help her improve and get better. Well, unfortunately, that tutor ended up raping her and emotionally scarring her for life. So we can see what she did was she would paint those to get those emotions out. And as you can see here, these are two women torturing Judith, who is in the Bible. So she's taking this on as her own story. If you are ever in Naples, you will be able to see this work by Artemisia in a museum that is in Naples. So we have now finished all the information on your section 7 for the Renaissance, and that concludes our chapter on the Renaissance. So we, of course, are going to be ready for a test, and the next video that you will see, I will go over some very important test reminders, explain to you how the test is going to be set up, and of course, if you have any questions, you will need to let me know.